Right-wing politics used to mean real organisation, real ideology, and real struggle. Now it's just endless soundbite, meme wars, and pointless protesting and performative outrage. The Rightoid has taken over. That guy who leans right but is trapped in the system, chasing dopamine hits from tweets and flags instead of actual power. Whether it's Mega, Reform UK, or the broader nationalist scene, we're watching movements slowly descend into Sadism, all vibes, no victory. Even the left actually want to get into power rather than the right does, which is counterproductive to any movement. We're looking at the rise of Rightoidism, the slow decline of the genuine right-wing movement into performativity, soundbiteism, and pointless protesting. The rise of the Rightoid, as Academic Agent's recent video breaks down, will examine how the modern right has become emotionally driven, aesthetically obsessed, and ideologically hollow. This isn't just criticism, it's a warning for anyone who actually wants real change instead of the next viral clip. This rot is deep, and it's actively destroying any chance of right-wing victory in Britain and beyond. The term rightoid describes someone who leans right on the political spectrum but is exceptionally stupid, dishonest, or both. They operate entirely within the existing left-right kosher dialect. Republican versus Democrat, Reform versus Labour, populist right versus globalist left. Every issue ultimately funnels back to voting for the next right-wing figure and supporting Israel, no matter how much they claim to be dissidents. The Rightoid is the perfect counter-revolutionary agent. He shapeshifts effortlessly between a oppressed freedom fighter and victorious Caesar without any cognitive dissonance. One day, he's raging on about the rigged system. The next, he's celebrating Trump or Farage as a total vindication, even though they're a part of the system or just downright bad. This emotional volatility is key. Politics becomes about feelings of winning rather than actual concrete institutional or demographic change. It's hyper-real aesthetics, memes, clips, headlines, and vibes more than actual power structures or long-term strategy. This mindset is everywhere in the UK right now. You see it in Reform UK supporters, as they've also been highly Americanized, as you've seen from some of the performative sadism you've seen in a couple of their meetings or some of their events, who treat every Farage speech like a historic victory while mass immigration continues unchecked. You see it in patriotic alternative and Tommy Tart circles that mirror each other, as Nat socks effortlessly flirt with the centre-left kosher stains about who's being paid by whom while grifting from their poor, clueless audience. Cooked up chavvy flag shaggers or attending a march is treated as a revolutionary activity. Everyone goes home, but nothing changes. The Rightoid doesn't build parallel institutions or focus on demographic reality. He performs resistance inside the system that's destroying him. That psychological trap keeps the right forever chasing the next election cycle instead of changing the underlying conditions that make those elections meaningless. Modern right-wing activity has collapsed into three main failures: performatism, soundbiteism, and soptivism. Performatism is all about the image, posting flags, attending rallies for the photos, or boycotting Bud Light because go woke, go broke feels like a victory. Soundbiteism reduces everything to catchy phrases and out-of-context clips. Joe Biden's America, Sadiq Khan's London, or whatever the algorithm pushes that week. Soptivism is the worst. Pointless protesting, endless online arguments, and reactionary outrage that achieves absolutely nothing. Academic Agent points out that rightoids treat politics like entertainment content. A boycott becomes a substitute for systemic change. Celebrating illegal migrants being bused to New York feels good until you realise it changes nothing about the overall numbers. The Rightoid trades in emotional dopamine hits, short-term feelings of triumph while the ideological balance drains away. Reform UK held huge rallies. Farage dropped red pill soundbites and the comments explode with, "Finally, someone is saying it." Sure, like it's never been said before by someone from the likes of Enoch Powell or Oswald Mosley, but the boats keep coming, the demographics keep shifting, and the actual policy outcomes barely move. The same energy that could be spent building local networks or pushing hard demographic arguments gets burned on the next viral clip or protest that gets ignored by the media. This is soptivism in action. lots of noise, zero institutional power. It keeps the right emotionally satisfied while the country continues its long decline. The Rightoid functions as a pressure valve for systemic discontent, sucking up to yet another Tories like Rupert Lull, another messiah comes into the light without using his brain. He looks like an anti-establishment crusader, but is completely delineated by the system he claims to oppose. Real power, finance, media, globalist institutions remains untouched while the Rightoid chases the next personality, Trump, Farage, Tommy Robinson, whoever else, or conspiracy theory that goes nowhere. This is deeply damaging because it prevents the right from ever developing the discipline, ideology, or organisation needed for actual victory. Instead of confronting demographic replacement, economic betrayal, or the loss of sovereignty, the Rightoid obsesses over the latest culture, war skirmish, or personality drama. In Britain, this means Reform supporters cheer poll leads, while the underlying population changes make those leads meaningless in the long term. It means nationalists waste years on flag marches and Twitter feuds instead of building the parallel structures that could survive establishment crackdowns. Academic Agent highlights how this is worse than the woke ideology because it masquerades as resistance, false hope to actual people that could make an actual change. I am subjugated to this myself, as going onto Twitter, I cannot help troll and waste hours arguing, but I think we all have to have done that to some degree. Rightoids get corralled into kosher narratives like counter-jihad, ignoring race, and instead obsessing over religion or globalists as vague boogeymen. They cheer multiracial MAGA or reform while branding any genuine racial realism as brown-coded. The result, a movement that feels active but achieves zero structural power. Until the Rightoid mindset is destroyed internally, there is no path forward, whether it's Mega, Reform UK, or anything else stuck in this psychological mode. This rot turns potential revolutionaries into harmless content consumers, and that's exactly why the system tolerates it. So anyway guys, hopefully you enjoyed this video about me talking about the rise of the Rightoidism, and especially to do with how it really affects, because I think that this culture really goes deep. For example, that I've been sort of like arguing or beefing with someone online about this, where basically like the Rightoid will basically like kick off, or I guess in this case like someone like a Nazbol like Matt Curlett, and I've talked about him recently in one of my videos about basically people just being constantly being electorally wanting to get into power, but then just supporting someone that's basically just a Tory. And I know I keep talking about this, but this rot really runs deep, where basically you get someone like Matt Curlett, for example, going about someone like Tommy Robinson, but to be fair, they're probably not that different from each other, because they're basically like, he's like a Nazbol. He wants to basically do some sort of like revolution, but truth be told, Matt Curlett is a coward, and it's ironic someone like him criticizes Tommy Robinson when he was basically on stream going about, oh, well, every one of those person that paid Tommy Robinson in a donation, if they just gave me £1, I'd have like £80,000 or something along those lines. And I just kept thinking about, like, you know, the guy who criticizes this but then keeps supporting systems like, for example, what happened with him also endorsing Rupert Lull. And these people keep supporting these types of people, and the problem is it's all based off vibe politics. It's not actual politics. Like, for example, like you could say what you want about Herman, but at least we weren't trying to like actually do something new, you know, like something like community politics, you know, like litter picking and being able to do something within the community. But the problem is with someone like with Curler is that he will basically keep endorsing these types of people and, you know, supporting globalists, and also some, you know, especially meat riding Putin. And the problem with doing all of that is that, you know, it's hypocritical, and this is the problem with the right, where people will support one person or the other. Like, for example, I was arguing someone about Curler, and I was saying that basically, how could someone like Curler basically go on about, oh, well, Sam, he was in prison, and all these other things that I mentioned before, and it's just, this is the problem with the right. It's all fantasy, performatism, and ultimately it just goes nowhere. And especially with something like with PA, where basically, apparently the reason why it wouldn't get registered was because they had issues with the funding system, which, yeah, that kind of speaks volumes. But I just keep thinking, like, someone like with Curlett criticising someone like with Tommy Robinson, but then sort of paralleling him secretly supportive or being critic to him in a sense that he gets the same amount of money, but he would probably want more. And because he's not registered his party, and even though he's garnered a lot of support online, but the problem with that is that essentially that's not going to change the institutions or anything as such. And the problem with this is that you can't support someone that is basically not going to change or anything when he gets into power, or even just constantly LARPing or just taking the money off the clueless audience. I think that's just as scummy as someone like Tommy Robinson, and obviously he's a dirty little junkie, not a lot of people like him. I think eventually he's going to be exposed, but again, the problem with like this cold right-left cursor dialect I mentioned earlier was that the fact that these people just, like I said before, just parallel each other. And especially when it comes down to Reform UK and also to do with something like with Labour, when there are also as well, Nigel is basically just establishing, because apparently recently he was removed one of his spokespeople for criticising Grenfell and saying that all the people that lived there were legals or something along those lines, or at least he implied that he removed him for inappropriate comment. And it's like, how do these people, or why would anyone back someone like Nigel Farage? But the problem with the Rightoid, when basically I was speaking to someone at gym, and they were going on about, oh, Farage is the best and Trump is the best. And they keep parallel each other, especially to do with like how basically Nigel Farage wants to turn the UK into like mega when it's very brown coded. And especially to do with Trump, he's like, they're basically, I won't really copy him because he's basically being retarded. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that the Rightoid will just blindly support him without looking at his policies, without looking at what he's saying. They'll just blindly accept it, and this is the problem with the right. I mean, I even saw even heard in Agent's video about people just basically should just be, he would probably rather just vote Labour or the Greens in again, because at least that way that people actually learn, because obviously the problem with the right is that there's this big constant issue of not actually building anything and doing anything, and nothing ever happens-isms. And I think until that issue is basically sorted with the right, it will just be constantly, continuously, and also calling people out with, especially who's centre-right and centre-left as well. People really need to understand that these people are just as bad as each other. And as well, if you want to go to the link in the description below with links to my other channels and my Discord as well.